Some casual learning and some illuminating of the manuscripts from the morning service, both for Rosh Hashanah and for Yom Kippur. Uh, what I mean by that is looking carefully at the most important of the piyutim, of the medieval prayer poems that we have, called Unetane Tokef, about which legends abound. I'll tell you the most significant of them in just a moment, and then maybe we'll back up and I'll tell you something else about them that explodes the legend and actually explodes the legend in terms of its history, but makes it certainly confirmed as a story of sanctification that becomes an important story of sanctification in the medieval world and in the modern world. And we'll look at some of the poetry and the concepts behind it and just talk about it. Those of us who are present in the room to this side and one to this side. So I'll keep going back and forth. And then there is the group on Zoom. Welcome, group on Zoom. Glad to see you. Glad that you're all there. Unetane Tokef is for Rosh Hashanah, both days, and also for Yom Kippur. It is the prologue to the Kedusha. Alan, you know what? I'd prefer to see the people and not the text. But actually, no, they need to see the text. The Zoom people need to see the text. So we're going to leave it just like that. Okay, fair enough. It is the prologue to Kedusha, which is to say that it leads us to a story of holiness. Kedusha is that bracha in the Amidah, which talks about the holiness of, well, it talks about the holiness of God. There is also a shade of a bracha that talks about the holiness of the day. It has to do with the transcendence of the day, the way in which this day and the God who presides over it peeks over history, just breaks the bounds of the heavens and breaks the bounds of history and goes from that which is timely to that which is timeless. Unetane Tokef, according to tradition, is a composition of Rabbi Amnon of Mainz, who in the 11th century is given in his town of Mainz, he is given a chance an annual chance on the day when everybody gathers, which is Rosh Hashanah, really, when everybody gathers, given a chance to leave this Jewish stuff behind and to become the apostate that he hopes he will become, to lead the rest of the Jewish community into apostasy. And he always, without even a second thought, refuses. This particular time, well, the truth is he still had no second thoughts, but he did say, give me 3 days. I'm thinking, I just want to be unencumbered by this. I don't want to think about it now. Give me 3 days to think about it. And of course, then he regretted this. The offer being made several days before Rosh Hashanah, so that this time he could make his proclamation on Rosh Hashanah itself. And he said that he would certainly not convert, and he would prefer to die to his conversion, to any conversion. And so he was mightily abused and asked his disciples, primarily the rabbi and poet Kalonymus, to carry him into the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah. And there, as he lay dying in front of the ark, he composed this prologue to the Kedusha, Unetane Tokef Kedusha Tayom. Let us acknowledge the powerful holiness of this day. Well, as I said, and then he died at the end. just before Kedusha, just before the heights of Kedusha, of holiness, are proclaimed. That would turn this into a prayer of martyrology, wouldn't it? And not really so much into a prayer for Kedusha. We get a sense that this story is a legend, certainly from the extemporaneous composition of the dying sage, but also from the fact that the focus has nothing to do with martyrology. It has nothing to do with giving your life for this Kedusha, but about the essence of the Kedusha, the essence of the holiness, the uniqueness itself. Unetanet Tokef Kedushat Hayom. Let us acknowledge the powerful holiness of this day. And by this day, he means Rosh Hashanah, or at least the poet, at least the legend is set so that it means Rosh Hashanah, not Yom Kippur. There's a bit of a confusion because Yom Kippur certainly is the climax of the season. And Yom Kippur is a day in the rabbinic vocabulary that is called Yoma. Yoma, the day in Aramaic, Yom in Hebrew. But the tractate of the Talmud that sits on my shelf, well, not on my shelf right now, it's in the Beit Midrash over to my left, way in the back, a big volume that contains Yoma. The truth is that it was a little bit heavy for me to be carrying it around. So I labored to bring it up the steps the other day and read from it and studied from it back in the Beit Midrash when I was alone in the sanctuary, just sitting here by myself doing a variety of things about which we might get to speak at some point. But I had Yoma with me and was reading from it, studying from it, enjoying it, and I just never put it back in its place. It's back there someplace. But Yoma, the day, means in the rabbinic literature nothing less than Yom Kippur. This Kedushat HaYom does not refer to Yom Kippur, it refers to Rosh Hashanah. So the legend begins to unravel. It remains an important story and the story that most people will tell if they're trying to tell you the story of the history of Unetane Tokef, written by the dying martyr Rabbi Amnon of Mainz. But really there's a fragment of what looks like Unetane Tokef, or a version of it, in the Cairo Geniza that's dated to the 8th century. So not the 11th century of Rabbi Amnon, but much earlier, and the authorship unknown. It remains the great example, a teacher of mine would have said, the parade example of what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur exemplify for us. It is urgent, it is tragic, it is in turns soft and sharp, it is smooth and embracing. It is wistful, it is terrible, it is tremorous, and it contains all of these things that we take in with the scratch and sniff valence that is so much a part of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It just looks like and feels like the day. Well, we should taste it a little bit, since I mentioned its taste. Let us acknowledge the powerful holiness of this day. Awesome and frightening it is. Ki hu nura ve'ayom. This is a day of fear and trembling. It is a day of judgment. Ki hu nura ve'ayom. Uvo tinaseh malchutecha. And in it your rule is raised. V'yikon bechesed kis'echa. Your throne grounded in compassion. V'teshev alav be'emet. And you preside thereon in truth. Well, what do you think of this array of emotions in the first of the paragraphs? wow, it's fun to be in this room on Yom Kippur and not have a mask on. I feel sorry for you. I apologize. When I went outside before I took the mask off, I went, as I suppose you did, to take a drink of the beautiful air, even though it was a little hot and stuffy. But look at the aspects of the powerful holiness, the Tokef of the day, unitanet Tokef. Let's acknowledge, let's give it to it, natan, to give. Let's give it up for the powerfulness of this day. Ki hu nora ve'ayom, awesome and frightening, but it founds your throne bechesed, in compassion, v'teshev alav be'emet, and you preside thereon, on this throne, be'emet, in truth. Confusing, an extraordinary array of emotions, don't you think? Anything come to you that you would like to mention? All you Zoom people need to just shout them out. Yes, Judy. Well, that is a beautiful, timely way to look at a timeless text. We have chesed and we have emet. We have compassion and we have truth. And for us, one of the real important tangles that we have to untangle, or things of which we always have to be mindful, is exactly how to do that. Compassion and truth, and how to somehow keep them balanced and keep them right. Thank you. Anybody else?
Steve, it's Hal
Yeah.
Sandick. I see a little bit in this, but it seems that on Yom Kippur, the imagery we have of God is more of the king than the judge. Does that make sense to you, or am I just being subjective?
Well, I think that's right. I think by the time we get to Yom Kippur, that is right. Malchut is something that takes over.
Well, why is it the image of the king? I mean, in the last analysis, why do we go to the image of the king?
An image of absolute power, within which, a framework of absolute power within which we have to recognize what are the borders of our own autonomy, what are the borders of our own choices, how much can we actually control in a world where, well, there's a certain malchut. I'm thinking about my own particular case, my own particular health, and so on, which starts to inform more and more. Because that's what happens. Our experience informs more and more of how we see these large categories. And there's a certain medina, there's a certain malchut, there's a certain kingdom within which I can only act, but I can't control it.
Right.
I can't be in charge of it. I can't change it. There's no revolution that's possible. But within it, I have all kinds of autonomy. And in some ways, I'm here on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in order to, oh, there you are. I'm supposed to be looking out there at the camera. Hello, camera. Not like this,
No.
but actually looking at the camera. But I don't know how to do that. Nobody ever trained me to look at a box instead of looking around at people. But there is a certain autonomy that we have. And from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, we're supposed to grow into a recognition of what that autonomy might be, how it looks, and how it is that we respond, and how it is that we flourish, given the boundaries that we have. So, and that brings us into the world of chesed. I would
Right.
say. How do you have
Yes.
chesed? How do you have compassion for your own self, for your own circumstances, for those around you? And what is the emet of a situation, if I can personalize it instead of politicize and not politicize it, although that's important as well? How do we actually do that? What are the elements? Questions from the audience? Can you repeat them for people? Yes, if I take questions from the audience, please remind me to repeat them for people. So let me see, look this way, but also look this way, but also look this way and this way, if I'm getting this right. And getting questions from here means repeating them for here and still looking here. All right, this is more complicated than I thought, but we're making it. We're making it. Thanks to Alan and your compassion, as well as the truth. Unitane Tokef Kedushat Hayom. Let us acknowledge the powerful holiness of this day. So that's interesting to think that a day itself is holy. A day itself, it has power to it. Is it the day itself, or are we lending power to the day, or ascribing or giving power to the day? It looks here, it's animated in this way that the day itself has power. What do you think?
Steve,
Yes.
I think,
Hold on, Zoomer, just a second. And yes, please, question, let me repeat it.
So it makes me wonder more about the word acknowledge. That's the word that sticks out to me most in the first paragraph. Everything else, it is what it is. And but
Ah.
so one of that is
The comment is that the key word here is acknowledge. For us to acknowledge. Maybe if we don't acknowledge it, it's not really there. Is that possible? We acknowledge, if we don't acknowledge the power, then it's not really there. That's very lovely. And that feels right to me. Now, on the Zoom, somebody had something.
yeah. Me?
Yes.
Hello, yes. You asked about today, that word, and for me, oops. Hello? Steve? Uh-oh.
Just a bit louder, we can't hear you.
Oh. For me, the word today means now.
Uh-huh. So hayom means today. And it does mean today. It also means the day. But that very triumphal tune that we use for a very triumphal piyut at the end of the morning's service, hayom, 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 that is about the day that is also today when we are making that acknowledgement. So yes, there's something very contemporaneous about it. It needs to be like that. David. Do we want to say a power of the holiness of the day? All right, help me understand a little more about that. Of the holiness. That the holiness itself has power. All right.
Rabbi?
Yes.
We've talked about Zeh Hayom. Not today, but Hayom, this is the day.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the power of having this is the day when it is every day that this is the day.
This is the day every day. Is there something, is there an echo of that kind of time frame also? At a certain point, every day will be the day. Lovely.
But you can't really feel.
Hold on a second, there's a microphone coming to you. And that way, I guess I don't have to repeat.
I'm just wondering if the power and the holiness, if it's every day, then it's not going to work, I don't think. But if it's one day and it's focused and you worry and we all the stories or the stories about God as a judge passing before, being who you are, and because I think that power and holiness is then resting on a throne grounded in compassion. I think that really is a very important part of it, because all the awe and the how off it's awesome and frightening are things that we put to it because we know there's an accounting. And yet, the throne with all the power and everything is based in compassion. So we create a lot of the story around it that makes it awesome.
A wonderful observation. We create a lot of the story around it that makes it awesome. Are we responsible for the holiness of the day? Could it be any day, that other day when we all decide? Is the holiness somehow a consequence of our collective decision that that's it? Or the collective decision not of a single generation, but of us and the ancestors, let's say? And suppose it were, if we say, God willing, every day should be a day of such concentration. Would that be a messianic vision or an apocalyptic vision somehow, or post-apocalyptic? It would get old. Yeah. Barak.
I'm chilling on that last thing you said, but the first question was, you first asked us to focus on the emotions that are
please.
embedded in the paragraph. And emotions are very time-bound. They're very momentary. And the emphasis, I think, in this paragraph, I agree with Kevin, that it's about paying attention. It's about recognizing the moment that we're in, and the emotions that are most salient are awesome and frightening. And that's something that's very hard to recreate. It's certainly something that's very hard to create throughout the year. I think it's even hard to recreate on your own. There's something very significant about all of us coming together at one moment and recognizing the awesomeness of what we're confronting. I think compassion and truth are notions that are designed to allay our fear, our feelings in front of the awesome. But the spirit of the paragraph, I think, and the spirit of the holiday, especially if you think about fasting, is about creating this very momentary, sensual observation that is very, very unique to the time.
Thank you.
Good.
So it can't be every day. It has to be a moment that rises up in a particular way. There's a particular kind of consciousness that comes over us at a particular point. Thanks for the observation that the truth and the compassion are in some ways neutralizing or softening the nora ve'ayom, the terror and the frightfulness of the day. That's very interesting.
Rabbi?
Let's
I'm
hold
sorry.
that. Hold on a second. I'd like to just move on so that we get a little bit farther. And I'd also like for us to, I'd like for us to be a little more, I don't know, frightened and delighted in some ways by the by the psalm, by the piyut, and understand, I don't know, go back to the scratch and sniff moment of actually hearing it in the synagogue, and not be so much not be too much in our heads about it. This is almost feeling like a Mount Sinai moment to me, the way this is supposed to feel. Rising up and then only later on being subjected to analysis. But let me move on. So you preside over your throne or preside in truth. And let me tell you what the truth is, the salient truth. Emet ki atahu dayan umuchiach. True, you are the judge and reprover, wise and witness, writing and sealing, counting and numbering, remembering all forgotten things, opening the record of remembrance that proclaims itself sealed by every person's hand, that proclaims itself sealed by every person's hand. Well, what a stanza. That stanza is just fattening. I need an hour on my exercise bike to work off that stanza. Judge and reprover you are. That's true. It's also true that you are wise and witness, writing and sealing, chotev v'chotem, counting and numbering, remembering all forgotten things, opening the record of remembrances that proclaims itself, sealed by every person's hand. What appeals to you? What frightens you? What excites you? Yes. Oh, there might be. There might be a microphone in your near future.
If I could offer, if you were looking for a catalog of what constitutes a true statement, you got it here, I think. You have all the evidence and divine insight into what is true. And then it's signed by your own hand.
All the evidence, all the insight into what is really true, and you've signed off on it. All right, now microphone has arrived.
Okay, yeah, just the idea that, I mean, remembering all of all the things you did this year, all the things that happened to you, you might forget. If you say write it down in a diary, as I do, you might forget that God is always going to remember. And that's kind of scary.
All right, did that microphone work? Did you hear on Zoom? Not so much in here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Try it again.
Harder with the mask. Yes, okay, you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. The idea that God remembers absolutely everything in any given year, what you did, what happened to you, that even if you say wrote it down in a diary, that you might forget it, but God never does. And that's kind of scary.
Thank you. And
Rabbi.
thank you for the addendum. That's kind of scary. What do you think about that?
Rabbi,
Yes.
it's John Goldstein.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, there's something very dramatic, awesome about how the goat is presented to the Almighty.
I've lost you. I didn't hear.
All right, there's something awesome, very dramatic about how just before the Chatzi Kaddish, we have the goat before the Almighty. And it is killed by him. He takes its blood and flicks it on the screen. And that is terrifying because the life is in the blood, we are told over and over again in the Talmud. And so the power of the Almighty to take life is demonstrated for us here in the flesh, no pun intended.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so thanks for extending it beyond the Piyut itself to one of its sources.
Steve, I have a question.
Yes.
You're on Zoom. I'm fascinated by this line about sealed by our own hands, and I wonder whether the fear and terror is in part because we acknowledge our own role in our fate or in God's judgment. In other words, it's not just simply acknowledging God's power. It is a recognition of our own responsibility and power in setting our futures.
All right, is it an acknowledgement of our own unsettledness? There's this wonderful line in Genesis. I absolutely love it. When the apple, the fruit, whatever it happens to be, has been consumed and Adam and Eve are hiding in the garden, and God's voice, as it were, ambulates through the garden and asks of Adam, "Where are you?" And Adam says, I was hiding because I was naked and afraid. And God says, "Who told you you were naked?" But I've always thought, I wondered whether whether the world would turn out differently if God had said, "Who told you you were afraid?" If this is the origin of somehow being embarrassed by not having any clothes on, that's one way that the story goes. But suppose the story had gone another way. Nobody had ever been afraid of anything before in the Garden of Eden. We have no story of fear. Fear has no history. But suppose God had said, "Wait a minute, who told you you were afraid?" So the origin of fear and the unfolding of fear. But that's the first time that it occurs. And it seems to be born like Athena from the head of Zeus, if you wouldn't mind me saying so. It's just all of a sudden there. It's something that is so native to us, after all, to be afraid. So, yeah, is it a part of us that is an acknowledgement, the fact that we are frightened by it? Apparently, we're not the only ones who are frightened by it, though. Look on just a little bit. A great shofar is sounded. A still small voice is heard. The angels are anxious. Tremor and trembling seize them. And then I repeat this because Yair Rosenblum, of whom I'll say something in a minute, repeats it in his version of the poem, or his use of the poem, when he writes this for, rewrites it as a musical composition. The angels are anxious, umalachim yechafezun, v'chil ur'ada yochezun, uveshofar gadol yitaka, a great shofar is sounded, v'kol dmama daka yishama, umalachim yechafezun, v'chil ur'ada yochezun. And he keeps repeating it. The angels are anxious. Terror and trembling seize them. Well, the composer, the author, the artist has taken this to another level. The angels are frightened, not only human beings. What do you make of that? Or of the great shofar being sounded and a still small voice being heard? Yeah, Judy.
So I was struck in the prior paragraph, writing and sealing, counting and numbering, remembering, about the anthropomorphic aspects of all of that, and the fact that it's creating a picture in the mind of that being done. And that's actually continues on, I think, with the great shofar, the trembling, and again, I think you're supposed to almost imagine yourself being there with all of the words and the pictures that are being used.
Yes, and thank you. You are supposed to imagine yourself as being there. You are there because it is, as several people have pointed out, Hayom.
Right.
It's today. It's
Mhm.
right now.
It's now. Right.
This is very remarkable and effective. This is our Sistine Chapel ceiling,
So,
I would say.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I've always thought that this was evocative of Sinai, where you heard the great shofar and the people trembled before God. And I thought that that was very much the same kind of imagery.
I agree. I agree. The fear and trembling, it is the same. It feels like it is the same kind of image.
And the shofar, because they blew the shofar at Mount Sinai.
And at Sinai, there's a shofar that keeps getting louder and louder, which is its own little interesting, draws its own interesting comment, that the shofar keeps getting louder and louder. It's not like there's human agency here that can, that runs out of air. Sorry?
Well, I was trying to look up the original piyut. I don't know if it's the translation, but it's usually appended to the angels are seized with fear and trembling because even they don't escape judgment. And that seems quite just an image of God's absolute power, that angels can be judged the same as human beings, and they have to be afraid of that fact.
An important image. The angels are frightened. The angels are terrified. Now, are the angels going to be judged? The piyut doesn't exactly say that. But somehow they're frightened. Are the angels going to get Torah or in some ways be implicated at Sinai? If I can just jump stories here, are they going to be implicated at Sinai, or are they observers? Very interested observers, but observers nonetheless. And yet they are frightened. The earth shakes, the mountain quakes, it's dark, it's light, there's thunder. There's a shofar that grows. Ooh, and the voice of the shofar, the sound of the shofar just keeps growing and growing and growing at Sinai. And now here another great shofar, and everything is quaking and shaking once again. And thank you, Susan. The angels themselves are anxious. Malachim yechafezun v'chil ur'ada. They are trembling, they are terrified and trembling. Why? The whole world, all created beings, not just human beings, are implicated in this, are witnessing this moment, are part of this moment. I know there's a hand way back there. Thanks for moving your hand. No, thanks for moving your hand closer. Yeah, yes, you have the microphone, the magic mic.
I do. What jumps out to me in that second verse at the end, sealed by every person's hand. There's all this emotion going on, all this fear, everybody, including the angels, there's all this emotion everywhere. And yet this puts us right back in the center. this puts us back. I'm going to seal my own fate. I'm going to take that responsibility. And my still small voice is heard through all of this. So it makes the day even more awesome and powerful, because with all of these king-like images, I'm still the one that needs my voice and needs to know my own fate.
Personal autonomy that grows and grows and is riskier and riskier, and you're signing, sealing, and delivering your own fate. Giselle.
Hi, thank you. I thought that the fear can be something good and something bad. In fact, when we start Rosh Hashanah, we ask God to put fear upon us like uvchen ten pachdecha. So the fear that maybe the angels are experiencing represent the fear that motivates us, that it can be a fear that paralyzes, but it also can be a fear that moves us to do something. So fear is not a bad emotion by itself. It's something that can move us toward like a better direction.
Thank you. What exactly is the function of fear? Is that also in some way related to our autonomy in the matter? How are you going to respond to fear? Are you going to let it paralyze you, or are you going to let it propel you, or have it propel you? Good, thank you.
Almost 12 a.m. in Jerusalem, so with a lot of love.
Thank you, thank you. I'm so glad that you could check in from Jerusalem.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Gavi.
Okay, thank you. I sort of have two comments that are relating. One part that jumps out at me is the wise and witness and remembering all things forgotten and opening the records of we're given a chance to examine our actions without sort of guilt behind them, knowing like to move forward and to learn better, and that shofar is a sort of cleansing sound and it's a very physical experience to hear the shofar being blown. Like if you think back to sort of before COVID of everyone being in the sanctuary together and you almost feel your whole body being moved by the sound, that I think it's some of it is fear and sort of is acceptance and sort of looking at this as what I've actually, these are my actions, like owning what you've done and like how you feel about yourself. And also some of it is just the physical experience of hearing the shofar being blown, hearing it getting louder and louder.
Yeah, how do you feel when you hear a shofar, Gavi? First time of the season, whether it's in Elul or on Rosh Hashanah, how does it break its way into you?
It feels like a wave of sort of sound and sensation of just sort of like I have memories of sort of standing, of being surrounded, like almost like we're like a wave from the ocean that sort of washes over me. And it feels, cleansing is not quite the right word, but also I guess healing would be the right word.
I remember years ago when the sanctuary was was completely different, that I was up on the bima and I was blowing a shofar. I was sitting on the chair that faced the Aron Kodesh, and I finished my meditation and I blew the shofar. And the custodian, Mac, at the time, Mac put his head in and said, "Rabbi, you sure know how to play the trumpet?" And all of a sudden it caught me, the difference between what I was doing and what he was hearing. He was hearing, I don't know, reveille or something. You know, he was a bugle. He was hearing something. And there is an ancient midrash that says, it's in the Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael, 3rd century, a commentary on Exodus. Other nations of the world have bugles and trumpets and, I don't know, French horns. I don't know exactly how you would translate it. They have all other kinds of such wind instruments. But Ashrei Hadam Yodea Teruah. You are the only ones who are Yodea Teruah. You know, you perceive, you understand what a Teruah is. It does something different in your spine than it does in anybody else's spine. It doesn't make you want to fit the dance into your hips. This is not a nightclub, nor do you spring to attention. There's something different. No? So, is somebody zooming? Yes. Steve Jaffe. Steve?
Yeah, unmute. Hi, thank you. I'm always struck by the contrast. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Between the great shofar and the still small voice. So my first question is, what are we to make of the still small voice? And my second question is, liturgically, I don't remember, and who's blowing it, by the way?
You don't remember what?
Another place in the liturgy where the shofar is called shofar gadol.
Uh-huh. The great shofar, this sounds really end of time-ish, doesn't it? Shofar gadol, shofar gadol. Well, the still small voice is in it you can hear an echo of the Elijah story, right? Oh, you're going to say that. Yeah, you can hear an echo of the Elijah story, that Elijah is on Mount Sinai and there is a parade, there's a sound and light show. He has found his way escaping from Queen Jezebel, and he has found his way. He walked 40 days to Mount Sinai, and he's in ostensibly Moses' cave, and there's a great storm and there's a whirlwind and so on. And he listens and listens and listens, and God's voice isn't in those things. And then they stop, and there's, silence, damam, which means silence, or else it means, as a teacher of mine said once, Tikva Freimer-Kensky, aleh shalom, whom some of you know, she said, it's onomatopoeic. It's the background. It's white noise. It's it's the thing that it sounds like masquerades as silence, but it's not really silence if you're in Durham until you go to the mountains, and then you know that was, well, now that's silence. Well, what I thought was silence wasn't really silence. There are degrees of it. But that's a wonderful juxtaposition. The great shofar is sounded, and then perhaps in the wake of it, a still small voice is heard. Maybe you can't have one without the other. I know we're getting close. 5 minutes. Jackie Resnick has her hand up. I saw that. Yes. And Cheryl Weiss. Yes. Jackie?
That was.
You're on mute. Okay, Cheryl.
Oops. I was just wondering, back with Steve and what he had said, I was wondering who's the voice?
I didn't hear you. I didn't understand
I'm
what you said.
sorry. A small voice is heard. Who is the voice? Whose voice is it?
Yeah, is it a who? Is it, how parallel is it to the great shofar? Is it some mysterious thing? Is it God? I don't know how. I don't know what do you think?
Well, if you were to connect it to, to the prior lines, right? And we were talking about how, I didn't think, how every, these are all the things, the record of remembrance that proclaims itself sealed by every person's hand, that you have a hand in your own fate, that maybe it's your voice. Maybe, your anxious small voice, whether it's the voice in your head, whether it's, your little reptilian brain, like, quavering in fear. Maybe it's you remembering everything, each one of us remembering. And I don't like to say it, but maybe, asking, in that small voice, sometimes, especially your kids, when they're like, I'm sorry, that small voice, asking that small voice, I'm sorry, you forgive me? Like, it's when you're confronted with the greatness of the shofar and the judge and reprover. I mean, how big can you be and how loud can you speak when you're asking for forgiveness?
Yeah. How powerful. It's a still small voice, to be sure, but is it powerful? Is it just as powerful as the shofar? David.
Is the sounding of the great shofar, in fact, necessary for the still small voice to be heard? There's this hubbub that's going on, and it hides the individual still small voices. And suddenly the great shofar is sounded and everybody stops. And then the still small voice can be heard.
You need this. Do you need the shofar in order to get to the still small voice? Yes.
Actually, to build on that and to push it one step further, can you read each line in this stanza as in a causative relationship with the line preceding it? That first a great shofar is heard, and that causes a small still voice to be heard, and it's the small still voice that's what makes the angels anxious and tremor and trembling seize them, not the shofar.
Not the shofar. They're used to grandiosity. They're in the throne room all the time. Bum ba ba ba, ba bum ba 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 ba. The fifth that we like to blow was on the shofar. Ba. That gets them. That's fine. But the still small voice, they don't know how to deal with that. I must say, they don't know how to deal with that. Oh, everybody will be able to understand when the king comes, because when the king arrives in the procession, there'll be a lot of shouting and screaming and so on. And Rav Sheshet, who is blind, is being teased by someone who says, of course, you won't be able to see all the color and pageantry that precedes that. So you won't know that the king is coming. And he says, oh, I'll know when the king is coming. And three advance guards come, and it's not the king. And Rav Sheshet doesn't respond to any of them. But finally, he says, this one, the king is here. And it turns out that he's right. And the one who had been teasing him said, how did you know that the king was coming? And he said, because everybody went, ah. People who were close to him went, ah. And as soon as the intake of breath, as soon as that happened, he knew that that the sovereign was actually coming. Well, we really have run out of time, or just about run out of time. You know, it strikes me, I wonder, at the very end of this text, there's a link. And Alan, I guess I'm asking you, what happens if, can you click on that link such that people can hear what's on it? I'm just curious whether you can play the link. Can you? Yeah. If you can, then you can follow what Yair Rosenblum wants to. Yes, you can, but hold on just a second. Pause it for a second. This brings us to another whole question that we're not going to get to now, because this is going to take us over. This is going to take us 2 minutes over. The nature of prayer. Here is a secular kibbutz, Beit Hashita, that is in the north. And it is as secular kibbutzim can get. And Yom Kippur, and no, there is no holiday that is particularly important to them. But then comes the great Yom Kippur War, and on the Yom Kippur War, the wagons bearing the dead keep coming into Beit Hashita. By the end of the day, 11 members of Beit Hashita have died, and Yom Kippur will forever be changed. And Yair Rosenblum, a great composer, comes and takes up residence in Beit Hashita as an artist in residence. And he composes, he wants to write a Kol Nidre, he wants to write a Kol Nidre, he wants to write a Kol Nidre, but it doesn't work out, and he writes an Unetane Tokef, the awesomeness of the day. And people are interviewed, and everybody is questioned, why, what do you do on Yom Kippur, and what do you do now, and how has everything changed? And this one woman said, well, on Yom Kippur, I pray. Not to God, but I pray. And that's characteristic of how people respond. Now, there is a ritual of Yom Kippur on this secular kibbutz, and it centers around the singing of Yair Rosenblum's Unetane Tokef. So you can follow it along, the words, and look at both sides of the page as we play it, and just see how it feels to you. Does it feel like Yom Nora ve'ayom? In what way is it a day that is awesome and frightening? Does that continue transposed literally into a new key? Not Rabbi Amnon of Mainz in the 9th century, not whatever preceded that in the 8th century, of which there is a fragment in the Cairo Geniza, but something very different and very powerful and very potent. So, Alan, if you can, maestro.
כמעט 30 שנה עברו מאז המלחמה הנוראה ההיא, מלחמת אוקטובר 73. נדמה שאנחנו סופרים את ימינו ממלחמה למלחמה. אבל גם נדמה לי שפצעי המלחמה ההיא טרם הגלידו, ואנחנו נושאים אותם עד עצם היום הזה. יאיר רוזנבלום הלחין לנתנה תוקף מנגינה, והקדיש אותה ל-11 חברי בית השיטה שנפלו במלחמת יום כיפור. נתנה תוקף.
ונתנה תוקף קדושת היום, כי הוא נורא ואיום, ובוא תנסה מלכותך, ויקון בחסד כיסאך, ותשב עליו באמת, ותשב עליו באמת. אמת כי אתה הוא דיין ומוכיח ויודע ועת, וכותב וחותם וסופר ומונה, ותזכור כל הנשכחות, ותפתח ספר הזיכרונות, ומאליו יקרב וחותם יד כל אדם בו, ובשופר גדול ייתקע, וכל דממה דקה יישמע, ומלאכים יחפזון, וחילו רעדה יוחזון, ומלאכים יחפזון, וחילו רעדה יוחזון, ובשופר שופר גדול ייתקע, וכל דממה דקה יישמע, ומלאכים יחפשו, וכאילו ידי יאחזו, ומלאכים יחפשו, וכאילו רעדה יאחזו. ויאמרו הנה יום הדין, לפקוד על צבא מרום בדין, כי לא יזכו בעיניך בדין. וכל באי עולם יעברו לפניך כבני מרון, כבקרת רועה עדרו, מעביר צונו תחת שבטו. וכל באי עולם יעברו לפניך כבני מרון, כבקרת רועה עדרו, מעביר צונו תחת שבטו. כן תעביר ותספור ותמנה ותפקוד נפש כל חי, ותחתוך קצבה לכל בריאה, ותכתוב את גזר דינם, ובשופר גדול ייתקע, וכל דממה דקה יישמע, ומלאכים יחפשו, וכאילו רעדה יאחזו, ומלאכים יחפשו, וכאילו רעדה ובשופר גדול ייתקע, וכל דממה דקה יישמע, ומלאכים יחפשו, וכאילו רעדה יאחזו. בראש השנה ייכתבו, וביום צום כיפור יחתמו. כמה יעברון וכמה יברון, מי יחיה ומי ימות, מי בקיצו ומי לא בקיצו, מי במים ומי באש, מי בחרב ומי בחיה, מי ברש ומי במגפה, מי ינוח ומי ינוח, מי שקט ומי יתערב, מי ישלם ומי יתייסר, מי ישלם ומי יתייסר, מי ירום ומי ישפר, מי יאשר ומי ותשובה ותפילה וצדקה מעבירים את רוע הגזרה. אמת כי אתה הוא יוצרם ואתה יודע יצרם, כי הם בשר ודם, אדם יסודו מעפר וסופו לעפר, בנפשו יביא לחמו. משול כחרס הנשבר, כחציר יבש וחציץ נובר, וכצל עובר, וכענן כלה, וכרוח נושבת, וכאבק פורח, וכחלום יעוף.
True, you are their maker and you know their makeup. Flesh and blood are they. Earth made, built from dust, destined for dust. Breath and being brought forth bread. Like an earthenware shard, like dry grass and fading flower, like a passing shadow, a vanishing cloud, like blowing wind, like scattering dust. We are like a fleeting dream. Well, more another time, just a little taste of that which is our records tell us as early as the 8th century. And with its most modern incarnation that prompts new rituals and trembling and fear and compassion and the search for truth, and emphasizes our mortality and our transience. Well, take it home, click on the link again. Learn a little bit more, listen to it, let it get into you. Chatima Tuva, a good seal for everyone. Thanks.